All right, welcome to Decentralized News, a recap of the biggest stories affecting the crypto economy. I am your host, Piter, joined as always by Ozzy. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Wow, I'm always amazed how much news is hard to pick and choose. But we're going to get into the many layers of the onion that is the Bybit hack, a concerning story about the U.S. Marshals and where U.S. Bitcoin is at the moment. We have a story out of left field from Georgia with a Bitcoin bill proposed from the Democrats. And then elections in Germany, and is there any effect, any trends we're seeing in Europe that's going to affect the crypto economy? Corporate adoption stories, there's always a ton of that. Michael's say they're back in the news this Monday. Macro and a speed run through the cryptoverse. You want to kick us off here, Aussie champion,
Yeah.
Canadian champions?
Oh, yeah. Happy to kick us off here. We're obviously starting with the biggest story this week, and that's the Bybit hack. It was the largest crypto theft of all time at $1.44 billion. If you compare it to some other big hacks, most notably like Mount Gox, which is hopefully closing soon, what, like 470 million? This is at least three times the size. FTX, the hack from FTX, not the FTX exchange collapse, was about 482 million, and then the Ronin network was about like 540 million. This is basically three times the size, four times the size of any of the other hacks in crypto and thefts, and that means, which is nuts.
The market seems surprisingly resilient when you put it in this context.
Oh, very resilient. When FTX happened, like Bitcoin dropped to 15 billion from about 15,000 from about 30,000. So it cut in half, more or less. And
Yeah, Bitcoin's still in range.
yeah, Bitcoin's still in range right now. So that's wild to consider. This theft was almost entirely in ETH. It was 1.1 billion in direct Ether tokens, and then 200 million in staked ETH, 44 million in CM ETH, and then 23 million in Mantle ETH. That
How
all
many ETH
equal,
are there?
yeah,
Goodness.
like quite a bit of ETH, and a lot of people had a lot of concerns about what this meant for the market, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Bybit's handling of the hack has been very impressive so far. They had no pause on withdrawals. They
Can you
did.
imagine if it was Coinbase? If they had, do you think they would have pause on withdrawals? They seem like they would be pull that trigger in a heartbeat.
Possibly. It definitely feels like a possibility. And if you don't know like how the hack happened, just a quick overview on that. Essentially, they have all of this ETH was being held in a multi-sig wallet on Ethereum with various members of Bybit having signatures that they need to put on to allow this ETH to be moved. It's it gets moved from there to basically help fund withdrawals so that there's not too much money sitting in those smart contracts in case they do get hacked. And through the use of a masked UI and masked UR, all of the users thought they were interacting with a genuine transaction to help fund the smart contract, when in fact it was giving the hackers control of the wallet and allowed them to withdraw that ETH. But
I, I'm imagining these are like transactions they do all the time, so if they're not slowing down, have a proper process.
that's it. It seemed from the communication, the how the transaction was presented to them, at least on this masked UI, as they keep referring to it as, looked like a standard transaction that they do to help fund the smart contract and ensure withdrawals. So that's the crazy thing, is that the hackers put a lot of work into making this happen, and in some ways it paid off for them, although that's
It's
not great for
debatable
crypto.
what happened. Yeah, because
Yeah.
like a lot of these funds, they're being tracked now? Some like how will they be able to spend it? It seems complicated how this all
Oh,
works out.
it's gonna have to take. It'll probably take them years to actually move all of this money, because the reality is most mixers like Tornado Cash just don't have a lot of funds, so you can't mix big amounts and things like that, and so there's a lot of obstacles to moving this volume of dollars. Bybit, however, also managed to secure a bunch of emergency funding from different firms, about 447,000 ETH tokens from Galaxy Digital, Falcon X, Wintermute. Binance also supported them with a quick liquidity ingestion of somewhere around like the 30 to 50 million range, and then one other exchange also gave them some support on that front. And
And it's just to clarify, I know it maybe seems super, but who was stolen from? Users were not stolen from in this case, right?
yeah, so Bybit, which was
It's
holding
just the
user
threat that they
funds,
become insolvent and not be able to pay users.
that was the threat. That would be the concern. If they were to have frozen withdrawals, it would have suggested that they did not have the liquidity available. They weren't
That's why
solvent
the
enough to.
funding is so important. Okay, we have it. We're still operating. We're solvent.
Yeah, we can allow anyone who wants to pull their money, their ETH off the exchange, to pull their ETH off the exchange, and like
Like it's going
we'll
to cause a
figure it
bank.
out. Yeah, that's it. So they saw this and they're like, crap, but they're like, we can handle this. They had the measures in place so that they can handle this hack, and ensuring that there's reserves for users.
It's the largest in terms of numbers in history. Maybe that's a sign of maturity for the industry in general, whether they can handle something like this.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you think about Mt. Gox or FTX, they shut down. They went bankrupt. And so this is good news. The level of professionalism that's gone on in kind of in the face of this theft has been very impressive. They've already got a new proof of reserves audit being started by Hacken, which is one of the top cybersecurity firms in crypto. So, um, so that is good. And Hacken has actually already successfully confirmed that the reserves are restored.
Yeah, I just saw that in an article this morning. That information, it was pretty new, but yeah, so they have the reserves, and there's at least some form of an audit that says it's there.
Yeah. So that is really good. And just to give an idea of who conducted the hack, it seems to be the Lazarus group, which is connected to North Korea. So that's a bit of
Brings
an
up like,
idea.
and that brings up some of the interesting stories that came out of this. Like there was some talk of an ETH hard fork, and that if you don't do it, you're supporting terrorism because it's this North Korean Lazarus group, which that seems to have died down. But it was just interesting. All
It
the
was
angles of this.
definitely some talk on X when it first happened.
Yeah, are they going to do another hard fork? You said it was harder now with the validators, actually, like the current situation.
Oh, yeah.
It's less
The
centralized. Sounds like the kind of the way you presented it.
Yeah, so the reality is there's not very many ways. It would have been very challenging for them to conduct a hard fork to undo this hack, because you need a supermajority of the validators to approve a hard fork. And the ETH Foundation nor founders of ETH control enough of the validators to have made that happen. They could have put forward a motion, but you still would have needed that to be validated by a large number of validators who are not majoritarily connected to the Ethereum Foundation. It was something that some people were calling for at the time, but it didn't happen and doesn't seem to be in the cards anymore. But one
Yeah,
thing
that,
that
that seems to have died down. I agree. But yeah, go ahead.
but one thing that has come out, and it's tied to ETH in this decentralization issue, is Mantle. So not a ton of this ETH was in Mantle ETH, but there was a about 30 million, $40 million worth in Mantle ETH, and the users the Lazarus group went to go unstake it and claim it and capture it so they could start moving it. And Mantle managed, through their system, managed to stop that withdrawal and basically saved that from being captured by the Lazarus group.
This is another type of ETH.
Yeah.
Staked.
So this was like staked Mantle ETH. And so through their unstaking process, they stopped the unstaking, and it was unstaked, but that ETH was not sent to the Lazarus group. It was protected and was, I think, returned to Bybit. I haven't seen confirmation of that yet, but that was my understanding.
But overall, positive story for Mantle, I guess you could argue, in that they had security measures in place that prevented this. I think it was like an 8-day wait or 8-hour waiting period or something like that, and they were able to make some moves. Something about that I read in the story.
Yeah, there's a delay period, and then it also has to do with their smart contract. From my understanding, has flags for these big types of a big transaction like that, and that contributed to them being able to stop and see the transaction.
Another layer was this connection to Solana and Pump Dump Fund meme coins, which I thought was interesting enough to mention. But let's see, the Lazarus group, they're the ones behind this, may also be linked to Solana meme coin scams, including rug pulls on Pump Dump Fund platforms. So not related to Solana Pump Dump Fund per se, but participants. According to investigator Zach XBT, which he does some amazing work out there, actually. On February 22nd, the attacker received 1.8 million from Bybit hack to this wallet, who bridged USDC stablecoin to Solana. Zach XBT wrote. The 1 million was then consolidated across multiple wallets on Solana, some of which had previous links to meme coin scams. So previous. But anyway, just dovetails into this idea is like meme coin season over. It's just associated with scams. Like crime fi is like a word now. The crime run that we're in, or whatever kind of terminology we're seeing, but our meme coins cooling off. The number of active addresses on Solana have fell to a weekly average of 9.5 million, down 40% from 15.6 million. Although I guess this is still above like bear market averages, like the baseline. So it's not like totally depleted or anything like that. But and also the rate of the monthly capital inflow into Solana and Solana's meme index turned into a monthly negative. I don't think it's been like that for a while. That was according to Glassnodes, so down 5.9%. Maybe we're seeing some change in mentality towards meme coin represented here.
Yeah, I think meme coins are also victims of the market. If you look at what's been going on, there hasn't been a lot of fresh liquidity being inserted into the market, as we'll talk about in macro, and the whole crypto market, especially alts. We've seen alts get pounded lately, and so I think memes and Sol being so connected and dependent on that sector of the altcoin market are definitely feeling that pain for sure. And there's also been just the whole thought process of, with Libra and some of these, a lot of these other kind of bigger memes that have launched recently that have essentially rug pulled. Melania.
And then there's Trump, Melania. Those are all really down.
There's some talk of the really short liquidity cycle that which has been getting faster and faster.
Yeah, Dave Portnoy started getting involved in it. He launched a couple of meme coins. They're both down 90% already, like days ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the lifespan of most meme coins has been less than a day, 99% of the time, maybe a couple days if you're lucky.
It's not like totally dead, because you heard these rumors with the Yay coin or whatever.
Yeah,
it's just, I don't know. Maybe we're in the final death throes, but that's like a big enough thing where what's going to happen with that? What's going to happen with that one?
And then this is just to dovetail, as Solana seems to be losing some of its vigor. This hack on ETH actually might provide it some additional energy, because Bybit's going to have to replace that ETH. In order to their reserves back to where they're supposed to, and to pay back the loans in ETH that they've received, they're going to have to replace that ETH, which means they are more likely than not going to have to buy ETH, which is going to put essentially 1.44 or maybe $1 billion worth of buy pressure on ETH as Bybit replenishes its reserves. This is something to watch as well because it could help lead to a big resurgence on ETH.
All right, now, and we talked a little bit about rug pulls and stuff like that, but what about getting rug pulled by incompetence? That is one of the ways, like just not knowing how to handle your crypto. You can rug pull yourself in this way. There is kind of a crazy story coming from CoinDesk on the U.S. Marshals. They hold confiscated goods, all kinds, but they're in charge of the crypto that we seize. So the FBI seizes. The most famous being the Silk Road seizure. It's supposed to be like the beginning of this stockpile, which is not the reserve. It's before we start actually buying Bitcoin. This is at least stop selling it and create like a stockpile. I guess it's the reserve. We're holding it on the just not buying new ones. But anyway, a source familiar with this CoinDesk story that the U.S. Marshal Service doesn't seem to know how much crypto it currently has, and the agency is struggling to come up with a rough estimate of its holdings. This is a quote. As far as I'm aware, the Marshal Service is currently managing this with individual keystrokes in an Excel spreadsheet. This is from Chip Borman. And he says he saw the processes in real time in 2023 as he's the vice president of capture strategy and proposals at ADDX Corporation, a firm that provides technological solutions to the U.S. government. He would turn down for the contract, so maybe he's like some disgruntled guy. But he's saying I saw how they're handling it, and that they're one bad day away from $1 billion mistake. Anyway, interesting quote. And then Timothy Clark, CEO of crypto consulting firms ECC Solutions, told CoinDesk that there's additional frustration that's just been building up. So this is not the first incident. The Marshal Service is taking only a handful of cryptocurrency assets, like 8 or 10. So all the different U.S. government agencies that have seizures can't send it to them so that they can do their job. They're supposed to be controlling it. They have to storage it themselves. And they take weeks to provide Bitcoin addresses. And when they do, it's just over a regular email without encryption and verification processes. And then there was another, it goes back 2022, there was the Office of the Inspector General warned that the Marshal Service was struggling in crypto management, tracking, and holding. They didn't have adequate policies, just said it is messed up over there. But here's an example. They didn't have measures in place to track forked assets. So like when Bitcoin split to Bitcoin Cash, they couldn't go get it and sell it. They don't have the processes. Potentially some issues in terms of how we're securing our assets as the U.S. government. And hopefully this is something that's going to improve. I know when we talk about the state stuff, that's something they have to work on as they consider, are we going to buy it? What are we going to do with it if we buy it? How are we going to buy it? Who's going to be the custodian? That kind of thing. Because it can be an issue. It looks like,
Yeah. And
we'll be lucky to have any Bitcoin based on how this is being run. If you believe these are just sources saying things, but if this is true, it would be like I was joking, we're better off if I was holding it, which is a sad thing to say.
Yeah. It also, the reports that from 2022 spoke to a lack of a backup wallet and of like handling and storage updates. So like just making sure that if they are using a ledger, which doesn't even seem like a guarantee right now, or some other kind of security solution, they might not even be doing the firmware updates to make sure that device it can handle its job properly. So
there was like some issue at Swan Bitcoin.
yes.
You remember? Okay, so when I read into it, one of the issues was, okay, so you can audit something, but if that hasn't moved, there's no proof that you have the keys and can access it and can move it until something gets moved around, if that makes sense. You can prove that you have it, but if you can't move it, can you really prove that you have it? You have something you can't do anything with because you don't have the keys. So really interesting issue as far as audits and what they actually tell you. So yeah, there's a risk to wallet security, and it just looks like they were thrust into this before there was any real understanding or rules in place, if you take this at face value.
Yeah. So could the US Bitcoin stockpile actually just join the pile of dead Bitcoin that is currently out there in the ether? Possibly.
Yeah. And Is there an even bigger rug pull waiting for us in Fort Knox?
Possibly. Absolutely.
That's,
So that's a pretty damning and concerning story from on the Bitcoin front and at the federal level in the US, but we're seeing some interesting things continue at the state level. The state of Georgia has introduced a second Bitcoin reserve bill. So they had already had one that was introduced about 10 days ago, and then 10 days later, a second Bitcoin reserve bill was introduced, which also was allowing the state treasurer to invest in Bitcoin. And the first bill was introduced by Republican sponsors, and the second bill has been introduced by Democrats in the state at the state level. And what's even more interesting is that the Democratic bill might be even more bullish if you're into Bitcoin, because while the Republican version limits the allocation of a Bitcoin reserve to 5%, the Democratic bill has no limit. And so the state treasurer can set the percentage and the allocation as they see fit. And so this is a pretty interesting move from Georgia right now.
yeah, it begs the question. So there's support from both sides. Like, okay, someone's introducing a bill doesn't mean that there's widespread support, but if Democrats and Republicans are trying to propose bills and basically get credit, that's what they're after, doing what the public want, trying to build their coalition in the public and give them what they want. How does this bill not pass? And the only thing I could think of is like just the maniacal need for these parties to be the one that gets credit for it, their bill. I hope they can work this out. It sounds like if you have Democrats and Republicans proposing similar bills, I'm not sure what the state legislature looks like out there, how it's split up, but
Yeah.
sounds like it's a good chance over there. Hopefully they can work it out. I saw an interesting on the state. It depends where you look at it, but there's between 20 and 30 states with some type of legislation. But how's this going to play out? This story kind of adds a dynamic we haven't seen yet about how this is going to play out and how long it might take for them to negotiate all these things. But some bills have been struck down. One in Mississippi. There's 3 other states, but the states Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming rejected the bills. Reportedly, this is, I think, out of Cointelegraph. It was just a tweet this morning, but over volatility concerns. But that might speak, it was an interesting point because it might speak to the population sizes. Those are low population states. So maybe we should be looking towards states, Florida, Texas, maybe even just Georgia, larger populations. I've seen some people predicting Utah as being their first state, which isn't like a huge population state. So maybe throws a little something into that bet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Utah is an interesting kind of conversation. We were talking about this a little bit before the show, just because they're like Utah compared to like most central states or Midwestern states is a bit more affluent compared to most of those other states. And they
So not
also,
just the size of the population, but also the size of their just kind of overall wealth and whether they can handle the risk of this volatility to get that.
yeah. And if you look at North Dakota, very like pretty reliant on oil. Wyoming and Montana, very dependent on agriculture, which are also like those are all very volatile fields to be dependent on income on. And Utah, which has there's some tech in Utah, in Salt Lake City, and a lot of other kind of less volatile income sources. It might give a state like Utah stronger economic footing to be able to take on some of the risk with Bitcoin.
Yeah, they got an independent streak out there. All those Mormons
Oh, absolutely. They'll forge their own path.
to Utah. All right, like sticking with politics, there was an election in Germany, and I thought it was interesting to bring up just in terms of Germany is the biggest economy in Europe. I'm not sure if it's the largest if you count the UK or how that works out, but if not the biggest, the second biggest, a very big economy out there. So they had an election for their, and it's a multi-party. They got to build coalitions. It's not like the United States where one of the other wins. So it's complicated and it's not where I'm from. But like, how does it affect crypto? So I thought it'd be interesting. Look for some signs in Europe a little bit. And what I can tell, it's like a net positive-ish. The party that won is not particularly pro crypto. but they're center right, when the right is usually considered a little bit more pro crypto, or at least more open to it. But the party that won was Angela Merkel's former party, just to give you a little bit of a flavor for it. But what was interesting in the election is that the party that came in second place and they got their highest vote ever is considered far right, and they are the more pro crypto group. Now, they're going to have to build a coalition with some other group, but it's not expected they're going to go to the far right. They're considered an extreme party. There's, it seems to be like geographically strong in certain areas. So there's big swaths of the country that just don't want them to have any part. And the expected new chancellor has said he's not going to negotiate. I mean, nothing is final, so we'll see. But it's not expected. But still, just the fact that they got such a
strong
large
showing,
vote, a record-setting amount of the vote for them. They're like anti-immigration, pro-crypto, some similar things that are going on in the United States. But anyway, so we'll see how that plays out. So some good news, but not necessarily a big sea change coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that we can say about Germany, although they have some pretty strict crypto laws, they do have some things that are ahead of the US in terms of banks do have custody services, at least one of the major banks in Germany. And then there's also another bank deploying crypto trading services. So this is interesting. And one of the other kind of actions that seems to be coming from the party that's likely to help form the coalition with the winners is a national service center to help track and kind of deal with crypto related crime within Germany. And
But
that,
they want to address it with regulation. They're not ignoring it. There's still some talk of crypto on the other side.
yeah, and it's not really addressing it with regulation. It doesn't sound like they're updating laws, but just putting in place measures so that if something happens, there's actually a force in place to deal with it. And if you look at Canada, the US, and most countries, they don't actually have a means of like Bybit's theft. There isn't really a means for any organization to deal with it. And so Germany is potentially going to be setting in place something that can at least try and help address crypto crime, even though it's the blockchain, so they only have very limited power and jurisdiction. Interesting to see those discussions in Germany.
All right, let's move on to not about this potential new three-letter agency in Germany, but the three-letter over here in the States. So the Security and Exchange Commission closed its investigation into Robinhood. It was less than a year after they were issued the Wells notice. The SEC's enforcement division informed Robinhood February 21st that it concluded its investigation, would not recommend any enforcement action. And Robinhood disclosed this on the 24th. They were subject to this Wells notice May 4th, but last month they paid, what was it, $45 million in the settlement. So there's no action, but they seem to have to pay to get out of this. Or I don't know. I don't want to say it like that, I guess, but
Yeah,
still close the book on it.
yeah, and this
On.
was really against Robinhood's crypto division, so it wasn't even against all of Robinhood. It was specifically looking at Robinhood's crypto division and whether they were brokering in securities, so essentially offering cryptos that were securities on their platform.
Just a couple other ones.
Yeah, exactly. And so the settlement, the essentially says that Robinhood admits to certain findings, but doesn't really go into much detail that were put forward by the SEC. But
yeah, their response to this was like, stop regulation through enforcement, please. And they were a bit snapping back, like we didn't do nothing. Of course, they're going to say stuff like that.
Exactly. But it's interesting. There's only a few more cases out there that are left around the SEC and crypto right now, and not that many Wells notices that are at least public that still need to be addressed. So this is maybe a good sign of what's to come, of seeing some more.
Oh, it brings up a good point. Like, how many more are left? Maybe worth a little bit of research. And before you can start your next trip, you got to finish the first one. So maybe that's part of what they're doing, just closing all this.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's Uniswap that's still lingering out there, and then there's a few others that are, I think, lingering, but not too many. And it's good to see them starting to get shut, and maybe we'll see some more get shut in the next month or two.
I need some good news, dude.
Oh, I think we all do. But this corporate Bitcoin holdings might be some good news for people out there. This is a piece that was put together by Bloomberg and is pretty interesting because it looks at non crypto public companies that are buying Bitcoin. So essentially, they must know these companies aren't involved in crypto in any way, but they are buying Bitcoin as part of a strategic reserve type strategy. And the biggest two companies own roughly 3,200 Bitcoin each. And there are,
MicroStrategy brought 20,000 today or whenever this weekend. They came through with the good news. Ooh, another
exactly.
buy. And they
So,
have what, 400 in the 400? I don't even know. They got a lot.
oh, they've got, I think it's, yeah, I think they're approaching, they're getting close to the 500 mark, I think.
Oh, so they have 2% of the supply,
Yeah,
right?
something like that. So, but this list isn't small. There's over 12 companies on this list right now that are not crypto related that are stacking Bitcoin. One of them only has
Only
about
has
12.
12.
One of them only
Yeah.
has 12, but we are all definitely seeing some of them
Slowly
stack
and
Bitcoin.
subtly.
Some
There's
more.
there's more. Yeah, there's more. I found three through the week, maybe a new ones. So there's SBC Medical Group Holdings, a Delaware corporation headquartered in Tokyo, announced it will purchase 1 billion yen worth of Bitcoin. Publicly traded Altvest Capital adopts a Bitcoin treasury and plans to buy 10 million BTC. And Resolve AI launches a $1 billion Bitcoin treasury program, starting with a $100 million investment. So continuing good news on that front, but nothing but positive momentum. Although I did see one, this is more nation state, but there was a tweet. I'm not sure how it's going, but there's like 3 days where El Salvador didn't buy their one Bitcoin a day.
Oh,
See that?
interesting. I hadn't seen that. So,
I, I haven't looked into it, but it's nice to see some of these positive stories. I gotta throw in some FUD. Sorry about that. Let's get into macro.
yeah. Oh, to be fair, I think starting with that fudge just throws us into a bit of probably the one part that also is creating some FUD for the market. This Friday, we do have PCE inflation numbers, which is the Fed's preferred inflation metric. So we'll have to see what that looks like on Friday because CPI had come in hot this past month. So does PCE follow that track or is PCE a bit cooler?
And now it's like solid. We're not gonna raise maybe one or two more at the end of the year, but
We're not going to cut it all, like maybe one or two.
can they get to a place where they're raising rates again? Is it possible?
If inflation feels like it jumps back up and
Employment's going down.
yeah, exactly. The other measure is a week next week on Friday, US unemployment rate comes out. That had also come in a bit cool in the last readings. We need to see unemployment heat up and inflation cool down to hopefully see something at the next Fed meeting on March 19th. That doesn't seem likely right now with 95.5% expecting no change. And even at one point, there was a 1 or 2% that were expecting a potential hike. This is something to
Numbers.
watch. Yeah, it hasn't happened. And the this is all leading up to right now a majority expectation of the first cut happening this year in June at the June 18th meeting. Still a ways away, but hopefully something changes on that front.
The other thing people watching the Fed for is this whole quantitative easing versus tightening. I saw a tweet from Benjamin Cowan. He was pulling from the Fed minutes. There's not a lot of excitement about quantitative easing coming, but maybe the new bullish narrative is just at least an end to quantitative tightening. So in the Fed minutes, he pulled this out. In their expectations of Federal Reserve balance sheet policy, survey respondents on average saw the process of runoff or decreasing their assets, concluding by mid 2025, signaling we may see an end to quantitative tightening
Somewhere
halfway through.
around June from the looks of it, based off of mid 2025 would align with about a June timeframe, and we're seeing an expectation for the next cut also in June. So maybe alt season kicks off in June, but
So this brings up this question about alt season. Like a lot of people are like, is alt season dead? That is a very common theme. What is going on with the alts? Are you cool with macro? Can I move on to this
yeah,
next story?
I was looking to make the same transition as you.
Okay, cool. So I saw a really interesting tweet from Jesse Eckel, and it was talking about he used like the new Grok when it came out and just asked the question, if you were to take away like all the dead tokens and all the meme coins, if there's going to be an alt season, you would think it would be in like some utility coins, some real builders, right? If you took away all that, there's only a couple thousand coins left because everyone's talking about this sheer number of meme coins, just millions. It's just like
Millions.
unsupportable amount of tokens, and that's what's ruining the market. And there's all these scams. It's just sucking liquidity, and people run back to Bitcoin if they come back at all. So if there's going to be an alt season, how do you sift through it? And I thought this was really an interesting place to like kind of start research. You have to buy the narrative that there will be a utility alt season, in the first place. But I was intrigued by this tweet.
Yeah, I looked at some of the math and like a little bit on the tweet as well, and I think at least the thought process makes sense. And
Uh,
I think the idea of removing meme coins is everyone's argument for why there is no alt season. But if you think about meme coins for the most part, if you look at the millions or hundreds of thousands that are being launched every day, 99% of them get either no volume at all, like they launch and then they're launched on Pump Fund, they're created, but they go nowhere. Like they don't ever graduate from Pump Fund. And if they do graduate, they usually don't survive more than a day. And so the reality is you can write off probably 99.9% of that meme coin total tokens and still be inclusive of the meme coin market. So I think it makes a pretty bullish case for any of these tokens that are in the utility space, especially if what we're seeing right now with meme coins continues, because I think it is driving people away because you have to get really lucky. It's very short term, so unless you're very deep, very involved in those trenches, it's not a lucrative or money making opportunity. Like you can't just sit and
like you
buy a
said,
meme
cycles
coin.
are getting shorter, the margins are getting slimmer. How do you get an edge to actually make money? It seems harder and harder. It's not getting easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like you can buy a meme coin one day, sit on it for a week or two, and potentially that meme coin still be alive and make money. More or less, you've got a couple hours if you're lucky. And for a lot of crypto investors, that's not a strategy that they can handle.
As they call the trenches, like you got to be on it all the time just to even try to be involved. Enough for me.
Yeah, exactly. So looking at the kind of the biggest altcoin there is, ETH. We've talked about ETH a bunch already, but they've got ETH Denver coming up on the 27th, so starting on Friday or Thursday or Friday this week, running all weekend. So we should expect some big announcements from Ethereum ecosystem projects coming from ETH Denver.
Yeah, that's always exciting. Conferences sometimes provide some form of catalyst, little movement, something to get excited about. We also have it used to be Phantom. That's Sonic. It's really been outperforming the market, especially recently. But Aave is expected to go live on Sonic Layer 1 next week. So continued adoption there. Maybe that's part of why it was pumping so much recently. Maybe there's some Selva news coming.
Absolutely. Something else that's coming up is for AI tokens is the next NVIDIA earnings call, which is supposed to happen on Wednesday this week. If NVIDIA's earnings call is very bullish, then expect a nice bump for at least some AI tokens, but something worth watching, especially considering a lot of AI tokens are on Sol. there's a $1.9 billion worth of SOL being unlocked on March 1st. So be careful. Keep your eye out there because maybe we see a pump in AI tokens or SOL could see some continued sell pressure. Worth watching on that.
All right, and our final story, starting in 2026, Sports Illustrated Stadium, where is that, dude? Will be the first major venue to fully adopt blockchain ticketing with tickets. SI Tickets box office built on Avalanche. So that's a post from Avalanche, but I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, ticket like
Full blockchain at a stadium.
yeah, blockchain tickets have been like talked about a lot for a long time, and to see this adoption at a stadium that I don't know where it is, but
Harrison, New Jersey.
okay.
The New York Red Bulls of the Major League Soccer and Gotham FC National Women's Soccer League. So not it's a 25,000 feet stadium. So okay. Sports Illustrated Stadium sounded like pretty major. Anyway, good stuff.
Yeah. Still
Not financial advice. Do your own research.
yeah, exactly. It's still a big enough stadium, so interesting adoption for
It's a
crypto as a
pilot.
whole.
It's
Yeah.
gonna help it.
But please, that kind of covers the show for this week. Please consider.
We never ask. If you're enjoying the content, please subscribe.
Yeah, it means a lot to us. We've appreciated a lot, all of the views and everything over the last couple of weeks, and the love the show's been getting. Remember, this is just educational and entertainment content, so don't take what we say as investment advice. Please do your own research because we're not financial advisors, and these are just the headlines. Make sure to dig into things before making investment decisions. Thanks for watching, and we'll probably see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everybody.